Judith Sloan is the contributing economics editor at the Australian newspaper. We turn to her in moments like these because I say the house of cards that the budget was on has all fallen over. Now, Judith, again, apart from many things we can talk about in the budget, they say inflation's going to halve in the next 12 months in order to make all of their other assumptions look good. Reality is that's not going to happen, will it?
Well, look, I think, of course, budgets are absolutely full of assumptions. They're a bit like the MCG on the grand final day to TVC, so there's many assumptions. But so basically, they're saying that inflation will peak at the end of this year at 7.75%, and then it'll be sort of make a dramatic, dive from the 10-foot tower. And by 2024, it will be back within the RBA range, which is 2 to 3% per year. I'm telling you, quite a lot could go wrong between now and then. And today's figures of over 7% was actually not a good start. It was higher than people thought it was going to be for this quarter. And it was interesting to look at what the components there, not that any ordinary punter would have been surprised. So it was housing costs, electricity prices and food. So those are the things that are driving the rate of inflation at the moment.
Well, also, we know that there's lots happening in the world, right? We know about the war in Ukraine and the effects it has. We know about China and their zero COVID, which means supply chains get sort of like kinked up in the hose. But also, the Western world decided to send everyone to their room for 2 years, then decided to pay everyone for the privilege of doing so, which meant there was going to be a hangover. This is part of the hangover. But also the expectations of this government when they were in opposition was about cost of living, which means inflation, was about wages, which of course have gone backwards now to 2011 levels. They told us they'll cut power prices by $275, but their own energy policy is going to mean we have to build a whole new electricity grid, which means, well, guess what? Power prices go up for at least the next 2 years. So is it fair to say that, great, well done, they won the election, but many of the things they promised, they cannot deliver?
Well, I guess we'll have to see. I would like to pick up Joe Hildebrand on a point that,
please.
In fact, the energy crisis in Europe predated the Ukraine war. And his point about it's all about the price of coal and gas is not actually quite right. You see, brown coal, which is still very important in Victoria, which generates between 60 and 70% of electricity in Victoria, does not have an international price. It is not an exported commodity, brown coal. And yet electricity prices in Victoria are going up very steeply. So it's just not right to blame the Ukraine war. It's a multifactorial explanation. And the thing is, and I mean, you'd understand this, Paul, it's a whole lot easier to close a plant than to build replacement power.
Yep.
And that's the trouble. We're having the early exit of coal-fired power plants, and we just are not in a position to be replacing those electrons affordably and reliably. So I think they have got a real pickle on their hands. And yeah, the $275 is dead, but, a 56% increase in electricity prices, that I would have thought was political poison.
Well, correct. And then when asked about it today, of course, he misheard the question when he was trying to dance through it, and then he blamed his big ears later in Parliament. Fair dinkum. Now, look, I don't know if Steve Hamilton, an economist, is a five-star guy or a one-star guy in terms of the industry. I'm sure he's a lovely man. But he writes today in the Financial Review, this is easily the weakest economic and fiscal strategy of any government since the Charter of Budget Honesty. It's the exact opposite of approach of a responsible economic manager. Now, I know one doesn't want to comment on somebody else's work, but what about that as a critique of the budget last night?
Well, the budget sort of reminded me of those letters you sometimes get, which is save the date. Those kind, the wedding's coming up. So it seemed completely pointless. You read the card, you put it down, and then you move on, right? So I thought, but the thing is, it wasn't a mini budget. I mean, in fact, I don't know really why they had it, because really what they wanted to do was to bring in it's about $10 billion of additional spending for their promises. And I loved this particular line of Jim Chalmers, that he was doing the hard yards because he wasn't spending all of the $144 billion of unanticipated revenue over the forward, which I think is a bit like me going shopping for expensive shoes and deciding that I'm not going to buy them and therefore needing a pat on the back. So I thought that was, if that's the hard yards, we're in trouble.
Well, or dare I say, when the bloke comes back from Bunnings, Dale, this was 20% off, but hang on, you weren't planning to buy it when you left. Oh, but Dale, it was 20% off. Oh, you know, we've saved all this extra money.
The savings.
Yeah, you think of the savings, exactly. Last one here, which is, again, what they're setting us up for. Now, obviously, this was this giant act of political theatre. I'm surprised they didn't save it for May of next year. Instead, it seems like they're trying to say, look, geez, we've got a problem here. We can't cut any spending because it's all really important stuff and we don't want to create any losers here. But, geez, we need to find some more income from somewhere. That feels like the actual point of why we just went through what we went through for the many weeks beforehand and the many weeks between now and the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, they had this term in the budget which I thought was quite offensive, which was legacy spending, like not our fault, yeah. And non-discretionary spending. And really what the budget shows you is that it's not just the next 4 years, but the next 10 years where payments exceed receipts, right? Now, you know, we can get quite Charles Dickens on this, but this is not a good outcome. And so I think you're right. I think we're being softened up for action on the revenue side. And what does that mean? More taxes. I do think they'll try and hit people who they regard as, you know, wealthier, high income earners. Trouble is that they're possibly under enough of them. So I think we were being softened up to expect some activity on the revenue side. Having said that, I really think GST is off the table. That's not in the Labor Party DNA to alter that. So, you know, I think it's watch this space. I think the trouble for Jim, though, is that, you know, having had the dress rehearsal, there's a real potential that the next May, the actual performance is going to be a bit of a letdown because, you know, we've had the theatre. I think you only get your first budget once. Someone should have told him that. Yeah. In many ways, I think it was a wasted opportunity.
And as we all know, the second album of a rock star, never as good as the first, and he well and truly thinks he's a rock star. Judith, thank you very much. Look forward to reading your stuff in the newspaper and talking again very soon. How good is she? Thank you very much. Judith Sloan there from the Australian newspaper.